I think we're seeing already what's happening, what's been happening, which is a failure across all the three legs of the stool of the energy trilemma. By starving investment, which is what Western institutions and governments have been doing in oil and gas, we've had energy price spikes, we've had shortages of supply, and as a result, the developing world has been burning more coal. So emissions have actually been going up. So we're failing across all three. I mean, this policy doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's equivalent to trying to solve obesity by cutting off loans to farmers and doing nothing about restaurants, supermarkets. That's essentially what's been happening in the world of energy. Somehow, let's starve the supply while the demand continues to grow, and that'll take care of itself. And it's causing more energy poverty, and we heard the frustration from Africa and similarly from Asia in the last session. This is actually making it harder to achieve basic needs and services. And Europe has been going around buying LNG that it now needs for itself, which is making it harder to make the gas to coal switch, which is the quickest way of dropping emissions. It's how UK has done it, US has done it. And at the same time, has been doing the exact things it's been lecturing Africa and Asia not to do, namely, don't burn coal. Now they're all turning the coal plants back on. Don't subsidize energy. Every country in the OECD, almost without exception, has been subsidizing energy, but they call it energy support. If you're a rich country, you don't call it a subsidy. But that's what it is. It's subsidizing energy at the point of consumption. So this needs to change, because this, hypocrisy as it's seen by the 7 billion who still need the energy access SDG is really causing a disconnect.
And it's almost, if you solve one problem, you're creating so many others. And I don't think anybody is looking at that joined up thinking is not happening.
So,
Bernard,
first of all, I think there's an important point that we need to address head on. This narrative of the transition has come to be dominated by a myth that the world can survive on 100% solar and wind power today. It's impossible. There are laws of physics. You can't store it. So when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, you have no energy. All the batteries on the planet can maybe manage 1 to 2 minutes of global energy demand. Therefore, you need something to back it up in the case of electricity. And it's only for electricity anyway. We haven't even addressed transportation and other needs for energy. Natural gas and nuclear are the cleanest forms. There is no totally clean form apart from using less energy. And yet, the activists are against gas, against nuclear, against hydro. It's not really clear what they're for. It's certainly not a feasible energy system, as Bernard said, that can actually meet the needs, not just of the 1 billion in the rich world who can take it for granted, but the 7 billion who still have energy poverty issues. On the greatest challenge point, there are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. If you are in the 1 billion, the OECD, as we heard from Brother Faridoon in the last session, yes, the only one that matters to you is climate action. Maybe income inequality in some countries, but basically climate action. If, on the other hand, you're in the other 7 billion, who can't afford to worry about the end of the century, worrying about the end of the next week or the next day, then all of them matter to you. Health, education, clean water, every single one matters fundamentally to you. And what these developing countries are seeing is global institutions, including the United Nations, neglecting them. And therefore, they are calling for reform, and they are calling for new institutions. Finally, I have to come to the defense of my good friend Wael Sawan that you attacked as being irresponsible. I have great respect for him. We were school friends, we know each other very well. For all those calling for the end of oil and gas, or investment in oil and gas, or reduction in production, as you seem to be doing, you have that right, but then don't use it. Ethically, morally, logically, Don't ride in a car or a train or a boat or a plane. Even the electric cars are made of oil, from their tires to their bodies. Don't use a smartphone. Don't use a computer. Don't rely on 24 hours of heat or air conditioning, depending on where you live. That's the only way you can make that moral argument, if you genuinely believe it. Otherwise, the hypocrisy is rejected by the entire developing world, that I can tell you. Sure, I'll take it the other way around, if I may. So we are an energy company headquartered in the UAE, proud to be for over 50 years. Our own transition, we started as an oil producer in the UAE. We're now across the Middle East, places like Iraq and Egypt, and 85% of our production is now natural gas. And in terms of our own processes, bringing emissions down, flaring to nearly zero, and then offsetting the remainder with UN-certified carbon credits supporting wind power in places like China and Mongolia, to achieve and declare net zero carbon neutrality across our operations, not in 2050, but 2 years ago in 2021, and we're maintaining that. So as an industry, how we produce must be cleaner and better, but also we need to explain and defend the use of our product. So our natural gas, by displacing diesel, we don't have much coal burning in the Middle East, but diesel for power generation in the Middle East avoids more than 5 million tons of CO2 annually. That's more than all the Tesla cars in the planet. So how we produce is going to change, how we consume the product is going to change. In oil, for example, light transportation is not a growth sector, but petrochemicals, making things, including everything relied upon for the energy transition, from wind turbines to solar panels, depends upon oil as a feedstock. Turning to COP28 in the UAE, I think it's going to be an inclusive COP. First of all industries. We saw in COP26, the industries responsible for 90% of world energy, oil, gas, nuclear, and coal, were deplatformed, which I think was one of the main reasons it wasn't as successful as it could have been. So in the UAE, I think it's going to be inclusive, but even more important than sector, it's going to be genuinely inclusive for all countries. Developing countries are not going to feel like they've been invited as an afterthought, as we heard on the previous session and lectured to, but they've been genuinely part of the whole process from the get-go. And the location, which is the Expo in Dubai, was built as an inclusive venue with all the LDCs having representative stands. So I think it's going to be a very successful COP for all of those reasons. Final point on this, north-south, fundamentally, as we know, carbon is a matter of stock, not just flow. And the vast majority of the stock up there is because of developed countries. And unless they are ready and willing to pay, as we heard in previous sessions, for developing countries, that's going to take significant funding, not just spending $1 trillion at home in Europe or $1 trillion at home in the US, and failing to come up with even $100 billion for the rest of the world annually, which was pledged in 2009. It's really going to have to pay for this, and that's the only way forward. So just a quick comment before the call to action on the UAE being petrostate and difficult questions. So the last COP was in Egypt, a major oil and gas producer. The one before was in Scotland, a major oil and gas producer. I'm not sure why the UAE is being sort of singled out. And Dr. Sultan, CEO of an oil company, but for far longer he has led Masdar and is chairman of Masdar, the second biggest investor in renewables worldwide across 40 countries. In terms of the call to action, it would be put climate policy through the lens of the developing nations. All of the net increase in emissions is going to come from there. They have had the smallest contribution to climate change, and they are suffering the most from climate change, as we heard. So spending money in the US and EU, where emissions have been falling for decades, is not going to help when Asia is adding a new coal plant every week. There has to be a fundamental paradigm shift in how we tackle this globally, and the developing world must be at the heart of it.